Shabbat Shalom, everybody. Rabbi Stephen here. Hope you've had a great week and enjoying this Shabbat. And this is a very special Shabbat because we have the bar mitzvah of Jack Mangan. He becomes an adult spiritually in the eyes of Hashem, and this will be his bar mitzvah portion. So this is also a special weekend. We have these special Shabbatot throughout the course of the year. This is Shabbat Shekalim. Okay, so this is typically the Sabbath before the beginning month, the first of the month of Adar. Adar is when we have the holiday of Purim on the 15th of Adar. And it is a Shekalim, okay, that's money. Actually, Shekalim was an individual unit of currency, the way we have a dollar, the way in Europe they do the euro dollars or the francs, or rubles, or any number of different things. So the shekel is the unit of currency in Israel, and every Israelite adult male had to give a half a shekel for the upkeep of the temple. That was part of it. Another way was to take a census so that they knew men between the ages of 20 and 50, in case they had to go to war, they knew how many shekels they had, because it's really against Jewish law to actually count people, to take a census per se. Okay, so, but Jack will talk about that in his Devar Torah, and hope you can make it Saturday. It's going to be very good. Jack's been working very hard. So other than that, we have the Torah portion of Mishpatim. Oh, and by the way, even though this is the Torah portion of Mishpatim, because it is a special Shabbat Shekalim, the Maftir, which is the last few verses of the Torah, it's in a different portion. It's in a portion that talks about the shekels, about the upkeep of the temple and about giving money. And then the Haftorah, it's a special Haftorah too. It's for Shabbat Shekalim. So those things are particular for this Shabbat Shekalim. So, Mishpatim. Mishpatim basically means ordinance, as opposed to Chukim, which are decrees. Now, an example of a decree is the laws of kashrut, which actually is in this particular portion. It says, do not cook a kid in its mother's milk. Also, there's later on in the Torah we get to the distinctions of which animals we can eat and which animals we can't. I mean, if you're a vegetarian, there's not an issue. But if you're a meat eater, a carnivore, then there are certain meats that are kosher, certain aren't. Why? Don't know. The only explanation we get is that you will be holy unto your God. That's it. So there's really no rhyme or reason beyond our ability to comprehend. But the Mishpatim, the ordinances, very practical. Right? There are specific ordinances. And this, of course, comes upon the heels of the Ten Commandments. Now, some of the sages say that some of the ordinances are based on the last commandment, which is thou shalt not covet. All right? But there's a few others, and we'll get to them in a minute. So let's talk specifically. There's a lot of commandments in this particular portion. It would take a long time to go through these, and maybe as we do this through the course of the years, we'll identify a few more. But there's actually about 3 of them that stand out. The first one is, what is the first ordinance that they talk about, the first mishpat that they talk about? And that is regarding the bondsman or bondsperson. This is a slave, and people went into slavery for 2 reasons. Number one, you were destitute. You had no way of making a living, or your means of living had just kind of gone by the wayside. You'd exhausted it. You can't make any more money. So you indebt yourself. You work for someone for 7 years or until the sabbatical year. And when you leave, they pay you kind of all at once. They give you a bunch of money, a bunch of goods, so that you can basically get your life back on track. The other way of becoming a bondsman or slave, as some people say, there's no distinction. The Hebrew word for is eved. That's for worker or slave. There's no distinction. You're working, you're working. So, but you can go into slavery or indebiture if you are a thief, if you stole and you're making up the payment. You don't have the money to pay back. Or if you had the money, why would you steal, right? So you're paying off a crime. You're paying off, you don't just pay back what you took, but there are also damages. You're charged for that. So you're working it off. Now, being a bondsman, being a slave, you are the most vulnerable. You're kind of at the lowest rung in society. You are at the most vulnerable, and there are laws that protect you. One of the laws is that if your master would beat you to the point that they would maim you, and what does maim mean? Loss of a limb, loss of an eye, loss of a tooth, okay? You're free automatically. Now, this leads to another thing. Eye for eye, tooth for tooth, life for life, Okay, what they call lex talionis, the law of the tally, the law of retribution. And that law, let's comment about this, that law was never, in Judaism, the Hammurabi Code, that's a different matter. But in Judaism, that law was never meant to be taken literally. And the reason is because some of the laws previous to that talk about financial compensation. This is also the infamous law that says do not suffer a sorcerer's or a sorcerer to live. Now, some people have taken that literally, and that was the reason for executing witches in the Middle Ages, all right? But the real translation is you don't suffer a sorcerer to live by paying them. You know, this was kind of an abomination. These are people that thought they had control of nature. They were, in essence, thinking themselves as gods with their spells and incantations. You know, these days, you know, it's all become Wiccan, right? It's like a new religion where they're involved with nature, and it's a little bit different. These were people that thought that they could, or convinced you that they could control the laws of nature. So you're paying them. Well, if you don't pay them, they can't live as a sorcerer, you know, doing that type thing for a living, so puts them out of business. But the laws of the tally, okay, the law, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, life for life, okay, it was never meant to be taken literally, right? Think about it. You know, back then, the greatest technology they had was fire, right? How do you, if you cause somebody to lose their eye, how do you lose your eye? What do? They go in there and they dig it. What if they create more damage? Okay, then it's not eye for eye. What if it gets infected and you die? Then it's eye for life. Now what? Now the person that did it, now they have to die? You know, it gets bizarre. Plus, again, because of the laws before it, we interpret that as it's all based on value, right? But with a slave, if he or she is maimed, they go free. That's it. That's your ticket out. Now, interestingly enough, in the Talmud tractate of Berachot, it talks a little bit about this. It says that, well, that's a negative, but it's a positive. The negative is that you were maimed. The positive is that you gained your freedom early. So sometimes bad things have to happen to put us on a better path. Just saying, okay? The other thing it talks about is, or another significance, it talks about justice. It talks about bearing false witness. And it talks about the fact that judges have to adjudicate fairly. Okay, what does that mean? It means if you're going to have a court case, you have to have all the parties there. You have to have the party that was hurt, and you have to have the party that hurt. You can't have a court case with only one party, and now they're going to mete out the judgment. You know, that's almost a no-brainer. It also talks about giving false witness. It also talks about favoring one party over another. So judges can't accept gifts. You cannot favor a poor person in a court case, thinking, well, the other person was rich and they can afford it, and the poor person needs money anyway, so let's just adjudicate. No, it has to be fair. You have to be blind. You have to judge just on the merits of the case. Now, we also talk about bearing false witness. Now, in the Torah, as it talks later, you're going to need 2 witnesses in order to verify, right? But isn't it interesting that if you look at the Torah, okay, and I'm going to do a sermon on this, heads up, you really can't go, except in a few cases, 4 or 5, maybe 6, sometimes 3 portions where they're not talking about blasphemy or about gossiping or talebearing. Very important. You have to be truthful. You have to keep your ideals and your ethics right on track. Right? Now, some of the sages say that, again, a lot of these laws that they discuss follow the 10th commandment, or the giving of the 10th commandment about coveting. Why would somebody steal? Because they covet what you have and they want it. And they're not willing to work for it. They're willing to come and take it, right? So there it is. That's a big part of it, right? So another thing it talks about is it talks about the festivals, right? It talks about the 3 pilgrimage festivals. Okay, what are they? Shavuot, which is in the spring, right? It's the Feast of Weeks. It's when we have Pesach, which is coming up, and then we have 7 weeks. We count the Omer, and then we have Shavuot, right? That was a festival when the Israelites had to come to the temple, and there was a big celebration, and they brought food, and in some cases they listened to the reading of Deuteronomy. The next pilgrimage festival was Sukkot, right? Because Sukkot, that's the harvest. and the final one was Pesach, Passover. So those are your three pilgrimage festivals. And that way, throughout the course of the year, the Israelites were coming to the temple and they were observing and they were helping to, well, the Shekalim, right? They were giving the upkeep, right? So we're going to leave it there. That's this week's Torah portion. And hope you're doing well. Again, we had a couple of services. The first weekend of the month, we have our Tat Shabbat at 5:30, 5:45. Thank you to everybody who showed up. It was awesome. We had a full, if you look at our synagogue, there's a section of chairs over here, a section over here. We had practically one whole section filled up. The kids had fun. We sang some songs. It was great. And hope to have that as we continue on. Okay? So, Shabbat Shalom. And looking forward to seeing you this weekend and services.